being here, for sharing your information, for being interested and kind of getting a handle on what's going on with attendance and our sites and the city, and understanding it through the data, and then moving forward not only as a museum community to see what we can do, but then also with the next step of involving Visit Savannah and seeing what they can also help us do and help boost our attendance numbers. So I am going to hand it over to Kristen, who will be going through all the data, and then afterwards I think we can just have a little discussion and just kind of talk amongst ourselves about what's happening. So Kristen, take it away.
Hello everyone, thank you for giving us your numbers. That was really helpful. Thanks for responding to my emails, I appreciate it. So me and Danielle, and also Danielle Christian of used to work at Birthplace Museum, is now with the Navy, I think. She was also a great help. But we're going to go through these numbers. If you have any questions along the way while we're on a specific slide about the numbers on that slide, feel free to raise your hand. But if you have an overall question, we're going to go over them at the end. Yes. All right, so we had 22 sites participate. I will say only 19 of these sites had usable data. Sometimes we got a site that filled it out, which was very nice of them, but then didn't have any attendance numbers, which I understand. And we have 15 in Savannah, 14 from the islands, so things like Pinpoint Island, Whitmarsh, that's Hy-Vee's included in that, and 3 that are outside of our region, so that's an hour drive from like downtown Savannah. Of these sites, I would like to say also know about this, Telfair is being treated when we put it out into different types of sites as 3 different sites, just as we got their individual numbers. But we have 7 historic houses, 6 historic sites, 5 history museums, 4 art museums, and again, 2 of those are Telfair, and 3 miscellaneous, which is kind of like UGA Aquarium and also the botanical gardens, things like that. So here's our big fancy chart of what it looks like. We can see that 2019, we're doing pretty well. 2020, I wonder what happened. 2021, we see again a big jump. And then 2022, 2023, we're seeing even higher numbers than we saw pre-pandemic. And now, we're getting back to 2024. A little bit lower, but seems to be kind of where we were at in 2021. These are our numbers, but I'm not gonna take too long in this section because, let's break it out by region. Our outside ones are skewing us heavily towards, we got a lot of good positive impact. Congrats to y'all people who are an hour outside of Savannah, but for the rest of ours, it puts a pretty heavy impact. So for 2023 to 2024, we're actually gonna change that and only include the islands and Savannah. So this is what the chart looks like if we get rid of people who are outside of a 1-hour drive. Now, one thing I wanna note that's really funny, 2022, 2023 had 25 people difference total. So this is everyone's numbers combined, and we're seeing pretty much 2022, 2023 stay the same. The chart looks about the same, but our numbers are a little different. So obviously, big drop in 2020. Then we're seeing 110% 2021, and 12% jump, steady on, and then a 13% drop from 2023 to 2024. So we are seeing a return to what our 2021 numbers kind of look like. But what I find really interesting is our pre-pandemic numbers to our post-pandemic numbers. So we're going to be breaking this out into 2 main categories. Last year to this year, and I'm going to pretend it's 2024, guys. Last year to this year, 13% drop. 2019 to 2024, pre-pandemic to now, 11.5% drop. That is total, that's not average. The average museum for last year to this year dropped 15.6%. That is our mean. Our median is minus 14%. I'd like to note now that we're not going to get any complicated statistical analyses because I am a museum person and not a statistician. I went to history school. So our mean and our median are pretty much as crazy as we're going to get with these breakouts. But you can see they're around the same. Now, when we go into locations, we can see that Savannah, the islands, and us all combined, we're all about the same. We're not seeing huge dips last year to this year based on where we are in relation. So that's nice. Now, museum type versus change. We are seeing that historic houses and historic sites are about equal and are about around our average, and that art museums are seeing a big drop, and history museums are doing a little bit better. But I do want to mention that there's one museum that's an art museum that's sort of an outlier, and so we've taken them out, and you can see because without their outlier, tiredness, we have about that 15% drop again. So we really just see that the history museums are doing pretty great. Let's say all of those history museums are coastal heritage sites, so good job, Nora. So here we have annual budget versus change. I will note that this budget here, our 500,000, 750,000, is just one site, which is why it's a little bit lower. But this is about what we expect. Sites that are small, that do not have a lot of budget, are seeing a bigger loss. Sites that have over $1 million of budget are seeing less of a loss because they have that sort of money to cushion it, or so is my theory. Advertising budget versus change is also really interesting. Now, you can see again, the sites that do not have an advertising budget, that cannot spend money on advertising, are seeing bigger hits. And then you see about less hits for the middling ranges. Over 200,000, that's only 2 sites, so that gets a little messy. It's best represented in a scatter plot. Again, this is hard to see because we got these big players with a lot of money. I'm happy y'all have big budgets. We're getting rid of you for this chart. This chart shows a relatively positive correlation that if you are spending more money on advertising, that means you have less of a loss. Hi, Logan. Now, I did bring out type of advertising versus loss, and it really didn't show us anything. So instead what I have is, based on what everyone who submitted, what kind of advertising are we as museums doing in Coastal Museum Association? Everyone's doing print marketing. These are ads in, the little guides, the concierge stuff, great. Everyone has their own social media, great. Networking with other groups, that stuff like Old Town Trolley, Visit Savannah, all but one of us is doing it. About 2/3, 3/4 of us are on the local news. Fantastic, I love my WTOC people. Digital marketing, we see less than half of them are doing it. I will say anecdotally, from Davenport, we started doing some digital marketing. It is incredibly effective, especially for events. And we see a really good return on investment. So, could be something to consider. Only 3 sites have these large billboards or physical ads. Again, these tend to be the sites that have more of a budget to spend on a billboard. No one is getting on the national news, which might tell us a little bit about that we're focusing all of our stuff in this area, which is great. And also seems that we're not getting a lot of national attention to Savannah museums specifically. Maybe that's Visit Savannah needing to pitch us, maybe that's us needing to pitch ourselves, who knows? But that's something to note, that we're only really seeing the local market. Now, here's our ticket prices versus our change. These are your 2024 ticket prices, and you can see that we're all about $15, with the exception of some of us who are free and some of us who are a little more pricey. But because we're all around the same cost, there's not a real correlation that we can pull out there. Now, before we go on to this, any questions 2023 or 2024 in this last year? Cool. Well, we should just remember that from last year to this year, 50% drop. 2019, 2024 is where we start to get really interesting. I'm gonna note here, this is just comparing the 2 years to each other. I don't know how to do a spectrum thing. Again, I'm a historian. So, on the whole, the city is down 8.7% from 2019 to 2024, but the average museum is down 3.9%. The median is a bit lower because we're having a lot of museums that are getting 20%, 15% increases, and a lot of museums that are down 20%, 30%. So that's why our mean and our medians are sort of off there. Now, location versus change, we don't include any of the sites outside of the local area, mostly because there was only one site that had data that was useful. And I was like, we're not just gonna do a whole thing on, I won't say who they are, but So, here we see something really interesting. As a total, we're down 4%. Savannah, the city of Savannah, is down about 4%. The islands are taking a much greater hit. Now, this could be a couple different reasons. My personal theory is that, some of the ones with bigger budgets, things like Telfair and Prohibition Museum, they are in here, and the people with lesser budgets are sort of out. But that's not exactly true always. There are people with over $1 million budgets out in Tybee, and we see that there's just a drop. Now, museum type, this is, especially to me as someone who works at a historic house, the most interesting one. We're seeing that art museums from pre-pandemic to now are doing a lot better. They're doing 25% up. Congrats to y'all, proud of y'all. History museums, again, are doing up. We've seen that history museums are staying about the same. I will say, history museums is a smaller groupage. Again, it is mostly our coastal heritage sites. Not all of the sites are coastal heritage sites, but some of them. Our historic sites are down 5%, so they are actually hitting our average. And then our historic houses are down 41%. And that is the average. That is not the worst of them, that is the average.
Is that number of people or dollars?
That is that's number of people, percentage of people lost. So we can see, this is what the chart looks like for historic houses. Again, our total down from 2019 to 2024 as a whole is down 36.9%, and as an average, museum on this is down 41.2%. This is a really bad chart, especially compared to this chart. You can see that the historic houses are not recovering pre-pandemic the way that the rest of the museums are. And if you take out one of the big players of the historic houses that really like take these numbers, 250,000 to now double the amount of attendance numbers, we're seeing an even bigger drop off. So historic houses need to shift, we need to change. And I say this as someone who works at one, and I'm sure Danielle will talk about this. We in particular are struggling. I mean, this is just not a graph you want to see when you work in a historic house museum. Annual budget versus change is a little wonky. I don't really know what's happening here. I will say, this is one site, and this is one site, so we can kind of throw them out. I don't know why people with a smaller budget are doing great. Sure. Over 1 million, you guys are doing exactly the same, which I think shows general recovery if you have the money to help support it. Advertising budget versus change is also a really wonky graph that makes no sense. Remember, in our last advertising budget, those people who spent nothing were doing very badly. Now they're doing pretty well. I think with these both is a bunch of confounding factors. Again, here's the chart. We're getting rid of the big players. It's a reverse bell graph. I can't explain that. Maybe if someone did a more in-depth study, we are doing a survey that takes like 10 minutes to fill out as opposed to a very in-depth study that might be able to explain this more. So I don't know what to do about that. Ticket price versus change. You can see again, 2019, 2024, we are seeing again no correlation. Now, I did go back and, Danielle Christian went back in the Wayback Machine to find what all of you guys were charging in 2019. And so we were able to calculate how much your guys' prices increased from 2019 to 2024. So this is a percentage graph. And we can see that your percentage of your increase did not really impact the amount of attendance. We can see that even when you change it into dollar amounts, it's all about the same. This is really good news for historic houses like us who are down significantly, but we're upgrading our prices, which means we can recoup some of those sales. All right, that was my presentation, really in-depth into the data. Any questions about what we saw? Any charts you want to see again? I know I threw a lot of info at you. Yes?
Is it possible to get the data?
Yes, we've sent it out, but I'll make sure, if you email Molly, she should have it.
Oh,
already.
she should, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Great. If for any reason you want me to come and give this presentation to your board, I can tailor it to be more to your site. I'm happy to do that. Just send me an email. And now I'm going to head off to Danielle to talk about what we're going to do with all this research we just found out.
Facilitated discussion. How are we feeling about this? I get to talk about maybe more touchy feeling things. Does this data seem to match what you have all been seeing and feeling anecdotally at your sites? Yeah, we felt the same way when we saw it. In terms of our next steps regarding this project, so we're having this meeting right now, we're gonna talk through it a bit, and then I want to see if there's anyone from each site, I'm thinking just one person that wants to then form a delegation to talk with Visit Savannah. So we have reached out to Visit, they know that we wanna have this conversation with them. They are very amenable to doing that. They want to find ways to help us. So I think that the next step is to say then, okay, so who wants to go talk to Visit and have that meeting with them to see what we can do. I will say that I think, especially the historic houses and seeing this, I know internally we're really thinking about what are we gonna change? What are we gonna do? I think we've taken a lot of steps programmatically to reach out to new audiences, which we found success in doing. But I think our overall experience, which for us is typically only a guided tour, we've offered people one way to interact with us for a very long time. And so we are looking at ways of diversifying ways for people to engage with us and trying to meet different subsets of visitors where they are and with what they might be interested in. So those are some of the steps that we are taking to try to alter our experience to meet visitors and hopefully get some of these numbers back up. But how is everyone else kind of feeling? What are we thinking from hearing this? Anyone want to share?
I did dig a little bit deeper into mine when I provided my numbers, and one of the I had two things that very much stood out with our visitation numbers at Wormslow. We are at half still of our school groups. Our school groups are at 50% of what they were in 19.
Yeah.
So I've tasked my interpretive team to come up with some strategies, because that's a big number. The other number I saw a big loss in was our annual memberships.
Interesting.
So that was the two things that my interpretive team is kind of putting together, is a couple of plans on, what are we missing? And but it wasn't all of our shortfall of what we're seeing, but it was definitely a big contributing factor, is that we're not seeing our groups have not recovered on. The school groups are the big one, they're the lion's share, but our adult groups haven't recovered either.
But kind of bus tour
Bus
groups and
tour
stuff.
groups.
I think we've found that somewhat as well. Like, we're having people cancel because they can't get the amount of people. Exactly. So we've kind of been thinking in response to that, are there ways that we can engage, with concierges or other groups? Kristen's built a really great relationship with Ethos. What are they called? Ethos?
Ethos
Events.
Event tours, something like
Yeah,
that.
so kind of looking at new partners, new orgs to try to get some kind of groups in. But I think the market for those is not as high as it used to be. So we are thinking, okay, well, how are people visiting? What makes up a group? Are there certain ways that we can accommodate to that?
So I think in general, and we haven't done a really deep dive as much as we plan to into our numbers, but we know based on looking at 2019 and looking at this year and last year that our walk-ins are dramatically increased. So that's fantastic.
That's great, yeah.
So we know our walk-ins are doing well, but every other category is doing terribly. So that tells us that, I think in a way, that tells us that our marketing is doing pretty good for the individual visitor. But in every other way, we've seen huge declines. And, at first, we were only looking at 2022, 23, which we knew were sort of boom. We knew that 21 and 22 were boom years.
Yeah.
So we knew we were going to see a drop-off. When the drop-off first began, I first noticed it at the end of 2023. Because we lit our numbers pretty frequently. What was surprising is the drop-off from the last 6 months to 9 months has been,
Keeps going.
it just keeps going. Like, it doesn't seem to have any end in sight. Even though that's what we're seeing, our walk-ins have helped to make up for some of that, and obviously changing our ticket prices help make up for some of that.
Yeah.
But what's concerning, I think, is when we think about next year, the year after. But group tours is definitely a huge part of that.
And the partnership.
And partnerships also. And I won't go too much into this, but I do think that in looking at what Visit Savannah markets, I think there's a lot they could do.
I think they are willing, really willing to work with us on campaign, making sure that the museums feel supported with them. I will say, I think that some kind of like preliminary feedback that we've gotten from them, and something I also believe in, I think we have to meet them halfway with what we are doing, with what we are advertising, and give them something that is marketable to them, because I think they don't necessarily know how to just say, okay, market museums. I don't know that they really know what
Yeah,
to do
and
with that.
I mean, I would suggest that before the meeting with Visit Savannah takes place,
Mhm.
that those of us who are going to meet with them obviously need to have a meeting and talk about strategies and talk about, yeah. And sort of go into that meeting with a plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, just looking at how Visit Savannah markets and what they market, I mean, they're marketing the historic district, obviously. That's a huge draw for people who come to Savannah. They love the fact that the historic district is this beautiful, gorgeous place with all of these wonderful historic buildings. You know, I sometimes sort of think that Visit Savannah, the way that they market, they're using those houses
As a venue.
as a kind of setting
Yes.
and saying, come see these things in
Not
this
digging
setting.
deeper into it and let people know what's there.
What is actually there.
Yeah.
Living history.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but the setting, obviously, to us, it's not a setting.
Yeah.
It's the heart of the historic, it's why we have a historic district to begin with. So, but yeah, so.
And I think that is something that we can definitely, like you're saying, talk through in a pre-meeting, but I'm hoping something that they will be receptive of. And if we can say, you know, this is how we envision wanting to be marketed and to have that. And I think they can work with us on specific placements too, like where does it make sense for
Right.
them to be helping us? Cause yeah, we're not looped in with the bars and the go out and try this thing, we're in a different lane.
Right.
So I definitely think that can be part of that conversation with them.
Right. Yeah.
So, yes.
Two things that jump out to me. One is with regard to this particular meeting, I think it might be interesting before you go to the meeting to compare the city's overall numbers, visitation numbers, and even if you could even break it down by month to, yeah, so that you have that arc to compare it to. Because I don't know what the last number is, but like, I don't know, I think it's like 14 million, 15 million, something like that. If there are that many people coming to Savannah and we're seeing this huge dip, like some way.
And they count all that by heads and beds. You know, that's where they're getting their.
Yes, I know,
statistics from.
but still like,
Yeah.
you know, this is, they're celebrating these numbers.
Right, oh, I know.
But
Yeah.
it's
At least it's
there's
a
that.
source.
Yeah.
At least it's a source. It might
Yeah.
not be perfect, but it's a
Right.
source.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, I think that would be beneficial to us regardless of even with them.
Yeah, just to know where we are.
With conversation with them, yeah. And then, something that jumps out at me that I think is really interesting is the historic house versus history museums and sites. I mean, I think of historic houses as history museums. And so what is that disconnect? And that's the kind of thing where you need to get into deeper market research. And this might be an opportunity to possibly reach out to Georgia Southern to, get either a business class or a marketing class to see the Coastal Museum Association on as a so-called client, because I don't think that CMA has the funds to do this kind of research. It's expensive and it's extensive to delve into to get some of that data. I think that would be really interesting feedback. You know, what do people think a history museum is? What do people think a historic house museum
Yeah.
is? And get some real feedback in that regard.
I will say the difference that just I made when differentiating them, that me and Danielle and Christian made, was one, people self-identified as what they were, but also I think in general historic houses typically have tours, like guided tours, versus a historic site like Tybee Island Lighthouse that you just walk up. So that's the kind of difference we made in this specific presentation. But you make a good point.
I just wanted to go back to your point, Christian, and maybe we can think about this bigger, is with the schools, we've definitely noticed a difference in our schools, and anecdotally, I'm not engaged with the school district, but bus funding is a big deal. Like, schools aren't getting funding to get on buses to go on field trips they were pre-pandemic, is what teachers have told me. So maybe like reaching out even into other groups beyond Visit Savannah, the school board, or either advertising ourselves or finding a way to partner for funds or something there. But school groups are definitely something that we've noticed, because we're kind of outside of this, but it's a big part of our network, so.
And if I can just piggyback off of what you're saying, at the birthplace, what we're hearing from school groups is the availability of the buses. They are competing with needing to get back to the school at a certain time, or the buses are running late, and so it's just not enough
And parking.
buses.
One thing,
cost of the busing too is going up
Yeah.
exponentially.
Yeah, we have groups that came year after year after year. We haven't seen you in 4 years. What happened? And they're like, can't get a bus. Can't get
Yeah.
there.
I do wonder if there might be an opportunity for our trolley companies to step up and do any kind of like pro bono
There's only one.
shuttling.
And
And Savannah is doing a lot for them.
Yes.
Maybe it's an opportunity for them to give back to the city and to the sites. I don't know how realistic it is, but I'm just saying, yes.
And looking back over from, cause I started tracking my numbers in 2019, cause I'm kind of weird. But, looking at the numbers, and then we come back from COVID, and oh my goodness, it was wonderful. Oh, I was so happy to have somebody to talk to. But then, you know, last year and at the end of 2023, we had a little resurgence of COVID. People started getting a little scared again. And then we had the SRV, RSV, STP, what was the respiratory system. I had several employees that were out with that, COVID and the RSV. And so I think some people are funny about going into communities, even though they'll still go to a restaurant and eat and travel, but they're funnier about a museum, you know. And we did originally with the COVID, the distancing, but I know that it loses it after so long, and we all are sitting here with no mask on. But one of the things I've noticed with the school visits is, yes, with the driving, the getting the buses, but also I've had the teachers that canceled because the students were misbehaving. Ever since COVID and the children were homeschooled, they haven't been their grades aren't quite as good as they need to be since COVID and going into a regular school system. So there's that balance. And then also what I was telling you earlier is, honey, I can't have 100 students in my museum, but I can pay $15.99 a month for a Zoom tour program and take them through, and 100 devices can see it, and I can reach them. I count that as a visit. Then those children will go home, and the teacher's there to supervise and answer questions. And it was the entire Chatham County 7th grade classes I gave 2 years ago. The students I reached, these students go home, tell their parents. I've gone to schools and done a little talk. Now I know it's different for me because I have a lot of goodie I can talk about with African art and the history and the cultures and things. But when you're talking about historic, but that's where I was talking. These homes were homes. All these historic places were homes. Put the human in it. That's what people want to connect to now, is the humanness of it. So tell about the woman and her children, and she lost her child and how she mourned over it, or they had this or they had that, or the terrible things they did and they had to pay for it, or whatever it was, but make them live. The house live, make it speak.
I think it's premature for house museums to start strategizing how we need to change what we're doing necessarily. I think we need to find out what has happened in our destination marketing through Visit Savannah that maybe is different now than it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And the messaging that I've gotten is 2022 and 2023 were benchmarks years. I've never seen numbers like that at Visit Savannah. And so we cannot make those our models.
Sure.
But your presentation shows we've not returned to our pre-pandemic visitation. And that is going to very much get their attention. So I know that Visit Savannah wants to work directly with us to give that play-by-play advice on what we can do with our limited budgets to increase our visibility through marketing. And then they want to take an active role in what they can do to continue to drive visitors to us. So they absolutely have a vested interest in seeing us succeed.
Yeah, they do, very much so.
Because when I go to the tour and travel meetings, that, Jeff's always said, don't worry about the 21, 22, 23 numbers, we'll always look back at your 2019 numbers, because we're gonna eventually level out and be back to those numbers, but this isn't showing that, so that's gonna be,
Right.
challenging.
And I think
Sign
the
for them.
last 3 months is the first time that we have really, at the Andrew Lowe House, looked very carefully at those 2019 numbers. And so we now know how much lower we are than 2019.
Yeah.
Or the fiscal year that went for us, 2019 into the beginning of 2020.
I'm also very curious about what your November, December looked like, because, I was painting a really bleak picture to my board in October about what we end the year at. And I've never seen a November as positive as that November, this past November was. I mean, I was like, there's that much admissions that came through here, I was
Yeah.
shocked.
So we did have a pretty decent November, but not, December, January, February have not been particularly good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, our
But we-
December was better, but not as good as November. And the theory that I have on that is it's entirely related to the election. And, you think about
Yeah.
the last election we had was in 2020. We had bigger more issues. And so I kept looking back and presenting it to my board, and there was like one economic crisis or thing or whatever after another. And I had to go, really kind of far back. And I just don't think that we're looking that far back when we're talking about elections. And honestly, this is absolutely not intended to be in any way a political discussion, but I really feel like it doesn't really matter which direction the election went. It was this relief that it was over, and then people started spending again, and that's why at least our November looked so good. At least that's what I presented to my board. So maybe I was not telling the truth, but that's the only thing that I can pinpoint as to why October, which is normally a strong visitation month for us, and in all of our areas of business, why October frankly sucked, but November blew it out of the water from what our normal years are. So anyway, I'd love to hear what some of y'all's November, Decembers look like too.
I think we had a somewhat of a bump at the end of November, and then December I feel like was pretty slow.
We were pretty slow in December, and January was bad. Honestly, we have not gotten good numbers until this week with
There's
presidents.
a real big presence.
This week, I think might be the week.
Now, just experientially, we notice around Lafayette Square to Madison Square, that area, since, again, the end of 2023, there aren't as many tourists in general. We notice that because when we are going to a restaurant or we're going down the street to, visit so-and-so, we see how the sidewalks are a lot less busy.
Well, because the cathedral draws so many people, so we kind of gauge that area
Yeah.
as a cathedral.
So I'm interested to sort of hear from Visit Savannah, like what are the overall numbers, that they may be willing to talk with us about, that are not the numbers that they necessarily put out in their public relations.
I also would like to raise, if in this discussion, that Visit Savannah, I'd like them to be a little more honest with their I'm sure they might not have known that we were gonna get so bad. And maybe the city's actually doing great and we're just suffering. But I want them to be a little more honest in I remember we went to a meeting in June and they were like, it's gonna pick back up, don't worry. And then it didn't. And it was like, okay, you were telling us these people are coming, and we know you're doing this work, but I would love to see a little bit more. I don't need you to always tell me a good story. I need you to tell me the honest story.
Yeah.
Well, so their numbers, they are up, the city is up.
Okay.
So they're not as high as 22, 23, but their numbers are strong.
But
With
they
general
have-
visitation, and they're not sure why it's not translating to our museum attendance.
But I mean, they have so many different ways to look at numbers, and, what we're really interested in, you know,
How
because
they break those numbers
how
down.
they break those numbers down, because the way that they can break them down, there are so many different ways they can break them down, and it sounds like they're doing great. And it sounds like the city is doing great, but if you start to ask questions and pick that apart, that can change. Big difference between people who stay overnight versus people who come to the city for the day. People who stay in Savannah, people who don't stay in Savannah. But I can say that experientially for us, because we get out and we're in the neighborhood a lot, and we know that there are fewer people. We can tell that there are.
One of the things that came up is that the historic district, certainly over these last several years, has really expanded. And so it's not this tight concentration of where we would be seeing tourists in town. They're spread out a lot further. They're going down past Forsyth Park now, like even towards the Starland district. And there's tourists walking on MLK, and he's brought them in.
Yeah.
So that concentration isn't happening, and so, and that's something that's been a theory, is that like there's as many, if not more, visitors in town, but they're dispersed
In
over a
different
much
places,
larger area.
yeah.
They've got different interests. They're
Right,
not-
and
they're
it's
Yeah.
totally, a theory or based on whatever numbers are being presented, because it's like, okay, if those numbers are here and they're bigger,
Where are they?
why doesn't it feel like it's
Right,
suggested as it
right.
usually is?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, if those numbers are correct, it's just we are not necessarily
We're
seeing.
not getting a piece of that pie.
Right, we need that piece of the pie.
Well,
Yeah.
Visit Savannah would have we had that big of a significant demographic shift? Because let's be honest, we have a certain demographic that's gonna visit our sites.
Yeah.
The younger demographic is not gonna, and
Well, if you market the
the
younger
historic sites
demographic,
really is
of course,
not.
they're gonna be the stronger one
Yeah.
here. So
Right.
that's what we're trying to get at, is
Mhm.
are they marketing to a little bit of everybody, so that those who were not the younger demographic who wanna come see historic sites are knowing that we're here and they've never been here before.
I think something to think about, and I think Savannah uses like these visitor profiles and kind of targeting certain
Yeah.
people in certain ways. But I think that one thing that we can do as museums is not count out maybe the people who are here for a shorter trip. How can we accommodate those kind of visitors? I think there are things that we can do as institutions to increase the pool of people who's coming to visit us, and not only rely on like one specific profile of person that we think will typically be interested in our site, especially younger visitors. If we don't start marketing and reaching and engaging with younger visitors, we're gonna be in trouble. So I think that that's where we can go in and, meet them halfway, or just really think about our own operations and how do we expand out, how do we become more welcoming, how do we engage more people. I think that there's things that we all can be doing, visit us, everybody as a museum community too, to come together and talk about that a little bit more. I think there is, because, if our average visit is like 2.5 days, and maybe it is people who are more thinking, I'm gonna go to River Street, I'm gonna go out to dinner, but maybe, we have this cool thing that we're offering, or you can do a self-guided tour, and it's only 30 minutes, and you don't have to spend 4 hours here. Trying to be more welcoming to those type of people, if that's the type of people we're getting, because I think it's more realistic, even for us to create new experiences to accommodate them, than to expect Visit Savannah to bring in a whole new type of visitor overnight. I'm not saying it can't change, and we can't do outreach, and we can't try to work with them to market to audiences who might be more favorably, intentioned to visit us and to engage with us. But I think it's a two-way street that we can be thinking about.
I'm interested in Tanya's idea about changing perceptions or understanding perceptions, because our sensibility as a world has changed since 2019, and if people think historic house museums are old, rich, white dudes' houses, I'm not gonna spend my, that doesn't accurately reflect the work that we're doing. Maybe marketing, the correct sort of perceptions, or understanding if that's an impact, or like what's going on there, but sort of understanding that why is kind of interesting too.
Real
And,
history.
Have you looked at the bigger tourism market? What are their tendencies right now
For museum stuff,
for general tourism?
I have not, I say.
Because- This is a good,
Sure, yeah.
this, right now, we're looking at information in a tiny contained packet.
Sure.
And we don't know how it relates or correlates to everything else in the general market. General tourism, is Disney Universal down?
Yeah.
Are the locations away from major cities down, or are they up? Are they trying to get away from the city, or are they trying to stay local?
Yeah.
We don't have information on, is it more outside visitors or more people that are local that are visiting these sites? There's a lot more nuance that needs to be looked at than just a very narrow window in a very narrow location.
No, you're absolutely right. So Visit Savannah subscribes to a national survey. It's along with that you guys may be familiar with it. But what they were showing is it's really down visitation, down trajectory numbers in retail, in attractions, which is what we fall into. I forgot the third one that was in the top three. But attractions was down as much as 30%. So
And what are you referencing?
it's a study, a national study that is surveyed regarding tourism through a company called Longwood. Visit Savannah subscribes to this, and they have this information they provided.
Yeah, it's on your extranet, you can pull it up on your, out of the back end.
Exactly, yeah. So it's available for review, but those numbers were, they were saying it was relating to, like, travelers were still traveling. Just as many trips, if not more trips. They were spending more on hotels, but they were, saving, right, so that they could continue to travel by cutting back, food, that's what it was, dining. So their dining out experiences, maybe they weren't doing the $100 plate dinners, they were going for a $50 plate dinner, so there was less spending on dining, there's less spending on retail and souvenirs, and then attractions was, I think, the third highest cutback that they
And
were.
this was nationally?
Yes,
And is this current?
yes, they put this out like quarterly or something like that, I can't remember.
And I saw something just a couple weeks ago. There's the great rise of craft breweries is crashing right now. There aren't many, many craft breweries, brew pubs, tap houses that are just folding in the last 6 months to a year. And that's not just in Savannah, that's in South Carolina, North Carolina. Basically the luxury spending, like you have the free money to just spend. And yeah, since June of last year, historically in the construction trades, election years are strange from the summer to about Christmas because you have that window of uncertainty and people don't wanna buy things because they don't know what the market flux is gonna be. And our market, I work in the market of Savannah, Richmond Hill, Hilton Head, market-wide, everything is down. We went from having work 3 to 4 months out to, we don't know what we're doing next month. Because we don't have those bids, we don't have those contracts. The uncertainty of spending really shifted since basically the middle of last year. That's all markets.
Just maybe to your earlier point, just by coincidence, we got a very non-scientific but kind of barometer survey from PMC, the parking company, because they run our parking lot. And they get license plates. So if you take, in very round numbers, half of all the cars that park in our parking lot are from Georgia. Some of those are monthly parkers, but to turnover is from Georgia. Another 30 to 35%, so we're up to 85%, are from those states that touch Georgia or North Carolina. So one state removed. And then the other 42 states cover the last, 10% of all. So it is really heavily concentrated in, the southeast, and in fact, those states that touch Georgia plus North Carolina. That's the other one that goes. And then the next one, out of all those, the next one is Ohio, at like 1.5%, something like that. But it does not, but also it doesn't match our pattern of busy or not, or busier or less busy in the museum, from our parking lot. So people actually are parking and going somewhere else often, maybe more often, and most of our business actually is walking up from other, being downtown, doing the tour, and hitting other things, and then coming to the Ships of the Sea. And people that are parking there are often, going somewhere else. And spending the day, but I think the 2.5 days, I think that's been very consistent for a long time. But they're not coming from far away. They're coming for long weekends and things like that.
There's an AAM survey that I read recently, that said the nationwide visitation was up with museums, but the repeat visitation was down. So people who might go back to the same museum more than once.
So maybe people are looking for novel experiences, not.
Or just cutting back,
Or
to
just
go
cutting
along with what you were talking about with the breweries and other.
Or they love come to Savannah, but it's their second or third time, and
Maybe that, given the
They
region,
don't- they
thing,
don't-
but Nora was saying about the, overall national trends with attractions being down 30%, that's pretty significant.
Well, I think we have a lot to think about from what we've learned. So I'm gonna say, if anyone is interested, an organization is interested in being part of that coalition, shoot me an email. I don't want the group to be massive, and cards right here if you don't have my contact information. I think we should try to keep it a somewhat concentrated group, so again, with one representative from, no more than one from each site. We will get together, so I'll schedule a meeting for all of us to talk beforehand, so we can strategize, and then look to put a meeting on Visit Savannah's calendar and get up with them and talk with them. I think also if we do wanna have more conversation just internally as a museum group, I'd be interested in maybe us doing that if there are those interested, so we can kind of keep talking through this and keep trying to strategize and work together, just to kind of see what we can do. In general, I love working with you guys anyway, just finding opportunities for collaboration. I think it's been successful when we've done that. It's something that we're trying to continue to do, whether it's a family day or during our fall festival or something like that. We really enjoy working with other institutions and bringing more to our visitors that way, so we're always down to collaborate. But thank you all so much.
Thank you for doing it.
And thank you to Kristen and Jada and Kristen for doing all the math.
Yay!